I hope you can find this talk useful for buying horses or ponies in the future, whether it's for competition or just for pleasure. And it also may help you assess your current horse or pony's conformation and understand why they move or school in a certain way. I've put a photograph of Galileo on the screen, which is the top thoroughbred stallion currently in the world. He's a good example to be looking at while we just talk about exactly what is conformation. It evaluates a horse's bone structure, musculature and its body proportions in relation to each other. It's good to have a sound knowledge of basic good conformation, as it's really useful when you're buying horses and ponies that you want to stay sound and have an athletic career, because obviously poor conformation can impact on their health, their movement and their competition potential. Before we move on to the next photo, just take a second to look how correct this horse is, how well he stands under himself. He's got really good limbs, particularly love his second thigh, shows how powerful behind he is, and his hind leg is a really good shape. He's got a lovely length of rein, a really sloping shoulder, and there's no doubt you can see why he was such a good racehorse and a top stallion. I thought this next video would be quite interesting for people. It's chasing mares at Doncaster. This is Lady Buttons that my husband trained. She's such a fantastic walker, and you can see how athletic she looks. This is another very good mare that won a lot of races, and she's a similar pattern, such a big front, lovely stride on her, striding out really well. The next one coming up, again, another top class chasing mare. You can just see a pattern with those three horses emerging. You'd like to think that they could do any job, whether it's eventing, dressage, racing. This mare wouldn't be as good as the others, and I think it's notable she's not quite as good a sort, nor as good a walker. We'll have a look at the next one as she comes down now. Nice mare again, not quite the turn of front of the first three, but she's a good walker. This mare is bouncing along. She's a little bit short in her front, but she's actually a very good race mare, very deep in her body. And there's Lady Buttons again. I think it's quite clear she won the race, and she actually looks probably the best sort of the three as you see her. We'll just take another look at this in slow motion. Look at this stride of Lady Buttons, how her hind legs and her hind prints overtrack her front feet where she lands. She is so athletic in her movement. She would have done any job, whether it was a competition horse or a racehorse. What an eventer she would have made. And this is the sort of walk we're looking for when we go to buy a horse. Obviously, they don't all walk as well as this, but this is the ideal, and it's good to keep it in your mind to show that a good walker, they always said, will be a very good galloper. Here's another horse looking at her in slow motion, Le Bargois. See how she really reaches out with her front leg. That's the sort of walk we'd absolutely love to see when we're at the sales buying a foal, a yearling, a 2-year-old. We would like a horse to walk like that, because a horse that walks like that usually gallops very well. I thought it would be good, after seeing her walk, to show you Lady Buttons in action and what an incredible stride she has when she's moving faster. Also, look at that jump. She's really quite incredibly scopy, and I don't think we've ever had one quite like it, but she's also the best looking and best walking horse we've ever had, so I think it all ties in really effectively. The best lookers and the best walkers can make the best athletes. That's her there as a 2-year-old, how far she's come since then. This is Lady Buttons as a 3-year-old, lovely frame but very immature looking. The correctness is there though, and here she is as a 10-year-old. What a lovely top line she now has, powerful back end, and she's developed into such a fantastic looking horse. This is her half-brother. He is a couple of years younger, hasn't ran yet, but I just wanted to show what a good mover the thoroughbred can be, and it's obviously in their genes to have this wonderful big stride. He's not quite as correct as his half-sister, but he's a very attractive horse, and he clearly has the same athletic movement that she has, and we'd like to think that he can be successful in a racing or a eventing career. We're going to look at some basic points of conformation that come up quite regularly. We've got two horses here. The one on the left, the grey, has a very clean throat and a good top line. He's got a well-shaped neck, and he would be easy to bridle up and ride, whereas the horse on the right is quite closed and thick through its throat. It's got quite an upright neck into an upright shoulder, and you would describe him as short-fronted and stuffy compared to the pony on the left. We're moving on to The bay here with a U-neck, a strongly developed undermuscle, which is just obviously quite an extreme case here, but when you compare him to the good front of the pony on the right, you'd find the pony on the right much easier to get in a natural outline when you were riding it compared to the bay pony. We've talked about horses that have good depth, and this thoroughbred here has particularly good depth to his body. He's lovely and deep through his middle, and this is what we often refer to as having very good heart room. You want good heart room because you want lots of stamina for a horse if it's going eventing or racing. And I'd like to compare this to the more modern version of sport horse that we're seeing quite a lot of. They are seeming to go quite light through the middle. They are very athletic horses, but this really shows how shallow some of these modern sport horses can be. He may be quite a young horse, but if you look at all these examples of recent stallions that I've seen advertised, they're all quite obvious to have a very similar build, quite shallow through the girth, and although they're good movers, it's not really what my ideal is. Here's a Connemara pony that's particularly well put together. It has the most beautiful shaped front, great shoulder and very deep, short through its back and very compact. We're going to move on to an example of a roach back on the right compared to a correct back with the grey. The bay pony has a very roachy back, and this would be quite an uncomfortable ride. And now we're on to a horse that is high behind. Now, some of you will have experienced riding horses or ponies that are high behind. Another one coming up, and it can give quite a downhill ride. It's not quite as comfortable as the horse that is up in front, and we're always trying to lift them off the forehand. This is an example of a horse that is very herring-gutted. It's also roachy backed. It's got a long prominent wither and a U-neck. It's light of bone. It's an Araby type, but it's not a good example of the Arab breed, and it's everything that is wrong with a horse that you would want to buy to make a competition horse. We're moving on to a big thoroughbred type who has some good points and some bad points. He's got a good head and a long length of rein, but he has a very prominent wither, and his neck is set on quite low. He stands under himself, but he is also very deep. Here we have a champion show cob that won at the Horse of the Year show about 5 times. He's an exceptional example of a show cob with a great front and shoulder, deep body, short back, and very correct limbs. He's actually a full Irish draft, but he's been hogged. This is a gypsy cob type, quite flat across the back, not much shape to the front. The head is quite long, and most noticeably a very short back end with a low set tail, which I particularly don't like. Compare this to this good looking coloured mare who I actually owned and showed. She is a much better shape to her, with a beautiful front, deep body, good shape back end, and a really lovely head and outlook to her. I thought it would be interesting to return to that champion cob that we just saw a minute ago. This is him under saddle, and we can see how his good conformation makes him such a lovely uphill ride. He's able to collect really well for a heavy horse, and he carries himself so beautifully. The rider can obviously is very well skilled, but when you've got a horse that's made in this way, it's much easier to have them light in the hand and carry themselves and move in the way that he is showing himself. We're going to start looking at some forelegs and hind legs close up. This is a good example of a cobby type foreleg. He has a lovely shaped knee. He's not tied in below the knee. He has a short cannon and a good angle to his pastern coming from a correct fetlock into a good hoof. Here we have a pony of ours. He's 20 years old, but he's got an excellent set of limbs. He's got good bone for his size. As you can see, he's got good short cannons at the front end, showing no wear and tear for a pony that's done a lot of work, and that's because he is so well put together. We're moving on to a diagram of typical faults that we can see. The first one being correct, the second pigeon-toed pointing out, third one pointing in, An extreme example, the fourth along and the fifth very wide at the base and would move wide in front. Common problems to look out for. Going now to over at the knee. This is something we see quite a lot in big competition race horses. It's often said that a horse that's over at the knee won't break down because they're not putting strain on the tendons, but these are quite extreme examples of over at the knee. We'll move on to back at the knee, which most people would agree is worse. These horses are putting more pressure on the tendons when they land and they compete and they jump, and are much more likely to strain a tendon. This is a less exaggerated example of back at the knee. It's one of our own horses, but he is still fractionally back when you look at that photo. This is a knee that is offset, so the cannon bone is coming from the side as opposed to directly through the knee down. Horses like this can often develop splints on the inside because of the pressure not being correct. Here's a horse that is very tied in below the knee, so it cuts in quite dramatically. It's also light in bone and long and weak through its cannon bones. Wouldn't buy one like that. Here's an example of a horse from behind. That is called cow-hocked, so its hocks come in and its toes point out at the back. This is a weakness, although you do see quite a lot of it. Another example here of another cow-hocked pony. When they walk, their toes point outwards, the hocks come together, and you would notice it, we notice it in racehorses that are a bit weak like that, don't go so well in deep ground, up hills. There's definitely a weakness. Moving on to the sickle hock. Sickle hock comes underneath the horse when it stands still, so there's not a true straight line down from the hock, it goes in over, you can see here, and there's going to be a few examples of this. Here's another sickle hocked horse. It's not a nice straight line down from the hock. Now this is a particularly bad fault. We find we wouldn't really consider a racehorse like this unless it'd been sent to us, because it's a weakness, and they often develop curbs at the back of the hock because they're just not as strong. All the power comes from the back end, and when you have a hock shaped like this, it can often develop a curb, which is the lump here seen at the back of the hocks. This is a bursal swelling that's gone there to protect the hock from the damage that has been caused by it not being built correctly. It's not a massive problem, but it definitely is a weakness. We're looking here at a horse that has got a very low set tail and a sharply sloping bottom. He is a thoroughbred horse. He's very short in his back as well. Although he's deep, he's very short backed, and look at his sloping rump.